and welcome to No Story Stagnates with me, Ernie Boxall. And today, again, I have the great pleasure to introduce Fray Patton. I believe we met through networking, Fray, but can you tell everyone who you are, where you are, and what you do at the moment?
Yeah, so my name is Fray. I use they, them pronouns. I'm currently located in Kansas City, and we met through the Happy Neighborhood Project,
That's correct, yes.
which I just joined so I could learn more about the opportunities of being a small business owner. I've been teaching for the past 10 years, but last year during the pandemic, was when I really decided to try doing that as my sole income
Yeah,
rather than part time. So I teach, I create classes that are individualized learning experiences, um, and I've been doing some research.
wonderful, wonderful. And that may be something that I talk to you about afterwards, Fray, because it's something I've thought about quite a lot. But the first question that I ask all of our guests, do you know how your mother and father met?
So, from what I've heard from my sister, because my mom doesn't always like to talk about my mom,
Yeah,
or not my mom doesn't like talking about my dad, sorry.
yeah,
They didn't end on the best of terms.
fine.
But they went to the same university and they met at a party.
Uh-huh.
Um, where inappropriate shenanigans were getting up to, which my mom would not admit to.
It wouldn't be university if there wasn't, Fray.
It's true. It's very true.
And so, can you tell me just a little or anything that you know about your father?
Yeah. So my father is he's a oh my gosh, Cancer. There we go. That's the zodiac sign. He's a Cancer. He was born in July. He's from the Kansas City area as well. His family's been here for a little bit
Yeah,
since his great since my great grandfather immigrated with his family.
that's
Um, and,
interesting.
and then the Patton side was here for a while.
Yeah.
Um, but he is the youngest of two boys.
Uh-huh.
His mom and him didn't really get along.
Right.
He is diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic,
Yeah.
does not always believe in treating it.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so he's very. I've been told that before he decided to just like really go on a bender, he was really into learning about bugs
Uh-huh.
and different species of bugs. He liked calculus quite a bit.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so that is what I know
Okay.
about my dad. He's
Thank
also a
you.
very good cook.
That's great. Thanks for being so open.
Hmm.
You brought up emigration straight away.
Hmm.
And what do you know the history of where your family came from, how they
I
got
know
to America?
I know more about my mom's side than I do my
Uh,
dad's side.
Right.
Because my dad's side doesn't really like to talk about it as much.
Okay.
Um, but my mom's side, my mom's mom, her parents were both from Germany.
All right.
Um, my mom's dad, they were from Denmark.
Ah, so there's Viking blood in there.
Hmm. Yeah, my mom really loves focusing on that.
All right. I've got a particular interest. And the name Patton,
Hmm.
obviously, a little bit of history brings up the name of General Patton.
Yeah,
Any connection that you've been able to find?
yeah. So we are related. I believe he is a great uncle.
Uh-huh.
Um, I on my dad's side, obviously.
Yeah.
But I haven't looked as much into it just because due to my own relationship with my dad's side of the
Yes.
family,
Yeah.
I generally disconnect myself. Though I
Sure.
probably should investigate it more.
Maybe worthwhile, but
Hmm.
that's for you.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great, Faye. Thanks very much. So you know a little bit about your story before you were born.
Hmm.
A story from the ages 1 to 10 that has left such an impression on you that you remember it straight away, and any lessons that you learned from it.
Okay. Um, so the first one I can think of um, is actually I wrote about it in a paper.
Oh,
It's not a good one. So
oh,
when I was younger, my grandmother on my dad's side and I did not always get along.
right.
Um, and so I remember one particular day we were trying to leave the house, and no one had checked to make sure the door was locked. And I had been waiting in the car for a while, but once my sister and my grandmother came back in, they were like, "Go check on the door." And me being myself, I was like, "That seems kind of silly. I was the first one here, but whatever, okay." So I go and check on it, and she drives off while I'm checking the door, and it starts pouring down raining. Like it we get quite a bit of heavy rain here in
Oh,
Kansas City.
yeah,
So it was just raining. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, I think in fourth grade at this point, I'm like 9. And I'm like running around trying to figure out where I can like keep dry and get my bearings. So I find this little awning that barely covers me. And I kind of hide there for a little bit. And I'm like, okay, this really sucks. What do I do?
yeah,
And eventually, I realized that it feels like the rain stopped altogether. And I look up and my sister's there and she's holding an umbrella. And she's like, "Hey, I got her to turn the car around. Let's get back inside." So she brings me over to the car and makes sure that I'm warm.
yeah,
And my sister's only like 1 year older than me. So it's still a child,
yeah,
right? Consoling another child. But yeah, that's a big one. Um,
yeah,
and the lessons I learned from that, I didn't tell it as eloquently as I later told it, was that even when life gets really bad and you don't really know what to do, there are people that are going to they're going to hold the umbrella for you, right? They're
right.
going to like be with
Brilliant.
you, and just like you don't have to be alone.
Great, great.
Hmm.
Is that something that you've taken, you've brought, particularly with your teaching? Would that be a little trigger for what you're doing now?
What do you mean about that?
Oh, you had that in your past.
Hmm.
I take it you're teaching, or have you taught younger pupils who may have had it in theirs as well?
Oh yes. So usually in those instances, because I know in the United States, um, teachers here are mandated reporters,
Uh huh.
which can feel a little bit like a double-edged sword to me as a survivor myself.
Yes.
Because it's great because obviously we want children to be safe, right? But sometimes how those investigations are handled, the children are put in more danger if
Yes.
they're not properly handled.
Yes.
Um, so one of my big things that I carry from that into teaching is that if I see a student that I know is going through quite a bit, even if I don't know all the details, I pause them
Yeah.
before we go super in depth, right, and get really emotionally invested in what's going on. And I'm like, "Hey, I just want to let you know that I do, like, depending on what I hear, I do have to report this to the police.
Right.
If you are worried that there is something that you don't want to report yet, if you want to have more control over that, I can help you get those resources to talk to an advocate. We can
Yeah.
talk to the social worker. We can talk to the psychiatrist um, who doesn't have to mandate a report because of what they do. They have to have that confidentiality piece. But then you can have more agency on when you want to do that. Whereas as an instructor, I have to, like, I am
Yes.
by law, I can lose my job if I don't.
And
Um,
just one more point on that
yeah.
phrase, that I know that over in England here, our social service people, the people who do much the same, they
Hmm.
deal with families who are overrun,
Right.
absolutely overrun, overworked, understaffed. Is that the same?
Uh, So I know that we as teachers, like I definitely had quite a few students whom, like for example, I can think of at an old school of mine where it wasn't even the first week of school, and like the student had become homeless
Yes.
just due to circumstances, and we as a school were trying to navigate like how can we make sure that the student can even get to school, what resources are available for that, for transportation, how can we make sure that the student has food, how can we make sure that they have the resources that they need to learn, along with the student happen to have a disability, so also taking care of their accommodations. That was a lot of my work as a special education teacher as well, especially
Right.
since students with disabilities are more likely to experience those things. If there's medical conditions going on, medical things in the US are really expensive,
Yeah.
obnoxiously so. So that can cause a lot of financial turmoil, and there's just a bunch of other things. Um, so there's like with the case management, a lot of it does kind of bleed into social work, where we're like not only having relationships with the students about like where they are academically, but also about like were you able to eat today,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. And what were your first school years like?
Yeah, so my first school years, like that I remember, my very first.
Yes.
I actually was born with broken eardrums, so I couldn't speak English until I was 6.
Right.
So I was in a special preschool from about 4 to 6, and I think
Yes.
I took kindergarten the whole day, which normally in the United States we do it just half days.
That's right.
Um, And during that time, I like from what I personally remember, I enjoyed it. I had a really great teacher named Miss Jackie. She had a really profound effect on me and really went out of her way to try to cultivate a relationship with me.
Yes.
And so it was a lot easier for me to cultivate relationships with other students, especially students who were shy, who
Uh-huh.
didn't feel comfortable standing up for themselves, because I could empathize
Yes.
with that. And so I kind of became this person who would stand up for folks who
Right.
didn't have a voice.
Oh,
Um, I do remember, or I shouldn't say I remember. I've been told that before I miled out due to like them fixing all of the painful stuff that was happening with my ears.
yes.
I was diagnosed with like oppositional defiant disorder. I would pull fire alarms. I was like throwing
Yeah.
things. So it was like day to night from what I've been told. And
Right.
I just remember the day
Yeah.
portion where I was like more chill and
Right.
in the experience.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
11 to 15. Okay.
Hmm.
I like to split the teenage years because I think they're very important. So
There's
11
a
to
lot going on.
15, you're in senior school now, are you? And things like that. So a story and a lesson.
Oh man. Um, I can only think of sad ones today. This is sad. The other one is I'm gonna make up a
Yeah.
name for this person. So there was a friend of mine. We'll call her Kathy.
Yes.
And Kathy, um, like in a very typical like middle school way, like she had just moved to our school. There was a lot of things going on. There was a lot of change, and there was a lot of turbulence in the household.
Right.
So while she was like trying to figure herself out and trying to figure her life out, she had a lot of turbulent emotions, and so she cut herself.
Uh-huh.
Um, so, and as part of that, like I became friends with Kathy and we talked about it. And she was like, I really don't want to do this anymore. I know that's not a great, like, obviously she didn't say it, not a great coping skill because she was like in
No.
7th grade.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she was like, I know this isn't the best way to share my emotions and to express them and all that good stuff. And so what we did was I asked her, I was like, okay, bring whatever you use to school, or like bring it somewhere that you won't get in trouble, right?
Yeah.
And we'll take care of it after school. So after school, there was like this creek behind the school, and we went farther out, like
Yeah.
away from the school. And we took her stuff, and I talked with her, and I was just like, so this is a turning point for you. I'm really excited for you that you've taken this opportunity to like reflect that this isn't working for you. So just throw it into the creek, and we're going to, like, this is our last time we're working with this stuff. We're going to try different things now. This is the turning point for that. And so she threw it into the creek, and we didn't talk about it again.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
so
And
that was
so,
positive.
yeah, I mean, it was positive. There was darker tones, but like my lesson from that was just kind of carrying on from something I talked about earlier. Like, I, like when I see someone that needs help or feels alone and doesn't know what to do, I feel called to help.
So a question that comes straight to mind then, Fray, is who was there when you needed help?
Oh, that's a great question. During those years, I felt really isolated, but now that I look back, there were some people who were there for me. And one of them that comes to mind off the top of my head is one of my childhood friends that I've known the longest. And I'm actually going to just go ahead and use her name. Her name is Lola. We met when we were kids through a school program, and we were very similar in mind and spirit.
Yeah.
So and she was one of those people that I could talk to about things, and I knew that she would understand me, like both on an emotional and an intellectual level. Which, when you're in middle school and there's so many varying places where people are cognitively and emotionally and all that stuff, it was really nice to have a peer that I could talk to about those things. And also, like, it felt like I was a part of her family when I went over, so that really helped too.
Great. And what lessons were your favorites at school?
Oh my gosh, what were my favorites? I mean, funnily enough, it was not math. Actually, that's not funny, because that's probably the big reason why I do what I do with my math.
Right.
Math was boring as heck. I actually really loved band, because I really loved our band teacher, and I really loved music, and I was always really good at music.
Right.
And I also really loved student council, which wasn't a class, but it was a way for me to actively participate in the school and feel like I was doing something that really helped my community and be involved and knew what was going on, which was something that I really enjoyed about middle school, which sadly I didn't get to do in high school.
Right. So you speak confidently now.
Thank you.
Is that something that you think came from that period where you were on school council?
Yeah, I would definitely. I mean, according to my mom, I've always been a bit of a bossy pants. I was always the person that was like, I'm going, like, if no one else is going to take charge, I'm going to just do it. We're going to do XYZ.
Yeah.
But student council was definitely a place for me to like do that in a healthier way.
Yeah.
If anything, I've learned since then to like, especially since I am more introverted, and that came out and became more apparent as I grew older. I've been more trying to incorporate, like, marry the I can be confident and I can be a leader and all this other stuff, but also I'm introverted and I don't want to just go in and tell people what to do, because that's going to start a fight. Whereas if I figure out what people are good at and want to do, then that's a lot easier for us to work together, because people want to do what they want to do, right? And
Great.
use that.
Yeah, some leadership skills there. So 16 to 20, you're getting right into education now, I take it.
Right. This is about, well, actually, I started supporting students even when I was back in 5th grade,
right,
which would have been like 10 or 11. But high school is when I started doing, actually, one of my favorite things about high school was I would go as part of the band. I was in marching band.
Yes.
I would go to the elementary school that was like a 5-minute walk from our campus, and I would help band over there. I would help teach band. And it was really great just being with the kids, and it felt like a nice break from all the drama and things that were happening at school. I didn't have to worry about any of that mumbo jumbo. I could just be with some kids and play some music and,
Right.
get to know these kids and what they cared about. So that was one of my favorite parts of going to the high school that I went to.
Yeah. So I'm an
sorry.
American football fan.
Yeah.
I'm taking a wild guess in that you maybe didn't play, but did the marching band perform it?
Yeah. So I will admit I am not an American football fan.
No.
And I spent most of the time when the marching band was there, when we were in the stands and we weren't playing music to like ram up the crowd and have fun. Then I was talking with people. I used to jokingly say that like I was like before I came out of the closet, I was flirting with people. But honestly, back then I probably would have had no awareness to me flirting at all. But
I know from the college football scene that I do look at now, how did you feel about performing in front of 60, 70, 80,000 people?
Well, thankfully, our school, it was in a really small town. So I'm from like Kansas City, Missouri. It itself is not a small city, but the place where I went to school, DeSoto, at the time, I haven't been there in ages, but at the time it was still a smaller town. It was kind of in that transitional period of like, are we going to be a bigger school? Are we a rural school? What are we doing? And so we were still like pretty small. And also I was one of like 150 kids.
Right.
Like I was in a marching band. So like I was just part of the formation unless I did something really wrong. I wasn't going to stand out. No one was going to notice me.
Well, I'm sure that it must still have put pressure on you to perform to the best of your ability, not to let the band down.
Yeah, no, I feel like at least in terms of marching band, I really enjoyed my the people that I worked with. So I played flute, and all of the people that I worked with in the flute section, I know were trying their hardest. They really cared. They really loved performing, and so I definitely would, work my hardest to memorize my music and really do it for like the group of flute players that I played with because they were all really good musicians and I didn't want to let them down. And then when I got older, I was a section leader myself.
Wasn't a flute like that, was it?
No.
I played Native American flute for about 5-6 years now.
That's awesome.
And yeah, beautiful sound. But I've never played in front of.
Oh yeah, no, it's a totally different experience. Yeah, but I also played in contests in high school, so I'm very used to performing.
Yeah, see, it comes across that there's a bit of a juxtaposition in that you sound as if you are quite an individual, and yet you're happy within big groups. And that's something of a contradiction in many ways.
Yeah.
And also, from what you're saying, you have a sort of military mindset in that you don't go in and tell people what to do.
Right.
You bring them with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a huge part of leadership for me. Especially since I am such an individual.
Yeah.
I found for me personally, like if someone tells me what to do, which I was a lot more patient with it when I was younger, but especially now that I'm older, I'm like, unless I trust that person, I'm like, why? Like, why are we doing it this way? What is the benefit? Who are we serving? Are we serving ourselves? Are we serving our clients? Like, is there a better way to do this? Why are we doing that?
Right.
Whereas, so that's why when I personally, and I bring this into my teaching as well, and that's why I focus student-led, since I have the privilege of being able to teach privately. I really try to focus more on like, okay, what is important to you and how can we connect that to what we're doing, because everything's connected.
Yes.
And even if people don't think what they care about is connected, it can be, even if it's just like, I need to do this in order to get one step closer to what I want to do,
Yeah.
indirectly, right? And so for me, it was always about, how can I bring out the best in you? How can I help you be a better you?
Yeah.
That's what makes a good leader.
So the question that comes to mind straight away then was, between the ages of 16 and 20, what was important for you?
What was important for me was definitely going to school.
Right.
So even when I was really little, I always wanted a PhD. And so like I was just like, every like elementary school, middle school, high school, those are all stepping stocks to college. And so when I finally was able to get to college, I was like, yes, I'm here. It's finally happening. I'm finally in a place where I'm going to learn all these cool things, and I'm so excited. And there was a lot of stuff that happened, especially my freshman year.
Yeah.
Like 3 people died in one semester. That was intense. But like at the end of the day, though, it was a bit of a wake-up call, because I was like, oh, snap, crackle, pop. My high school didn't prepare me for college.
Yeah.
But also there was an interesting joy of figuring out how I learn now and how I can adapt that, and playing catch up in a weird way. Like I enjoyed, to help me catch up specifically like with foundations and calculus and things like that, I would record my own notes on a video recorder,
Right.
and then watch that, or listen to it when I was going around campus.
Yes.
And I would do like 2 hours of tutoring for myself, like every day, for my calculus class. That wasn't even, and I was taking like 21 credits at the time,
Right.
with my music scholarships and everything. So it was a lot, but I really loved just being fully immersed in the learning. And it also made me realize I do like math, and that math isn't boring.
Yeah, no. But also, it sounds as if time management came into that.
Yeah, time management was a huge thing, which thankfully for me, I was always pretty good at. Like even when I was little, like my mom still jokes about the fact that when I was in elementary school, I would wake up at like 4 o'clock in the morning to study spelling words.
Yeah.
And she's like, no elementary schooler does that. Yeah. But like in my little elementary school brain, I was like, I want to be a I want to go get a doctorate. I need to have these skills now,
Right.
you know? And so like I used a lot of that self-motivation and also time management skills I already had in college. And it just, when you have that much time, it's a lot easier to have control over like what you're doing when.
So as someone whose life has maybe revolved around numbers, what were your favorite? Did you read? Who were your favorite authors? Did you write?
I did actually. So a lot of how I process like my big emotional stuff, and actually from the ages of like 11 to 20 was through writing. And I would play role-playing games, which is how I eventually got into like things like Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games. But I loved writing. My favorite author, oh, that's tough. Like from back then or currently?
Well, back then. Let's start with back then.
Okay. Because my favorite book back then was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Right.
I really loved the story, and also just like the contrast of like the monsters side of things. I always really appreciate stories that have multiple perspectives like that, where it's like, okay, we have this one perspective, and then we also are going to look at from things from the other side. That's always been very intriguing to me since I was younger. So Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was my favorite book, along with I really enjoyed Amy Tan and the Joy Luck Club.
No.
Oh.
I don't know that.
Oh, Amy Tan is she's I believe a Chinese American author.
Yeah.
Really awesome. Writes stories about just like family and immigration to the United States, and like what it's like, usually between like a familial perspective, like mother and daughter, or
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Um, so I enjoyed reading her books
Uh-huh.
when I was younger as well. I still do, but she's not one of my favorites now.
Going back to Frankenstein,
Mhm.
did you ever watch any of the old movies around Frankenstein?
Not until I was older,
Right.
which was really tragic because I
Yeah.
really love Boris Karloff. He's
Yes.
wonderful.
Yeah.
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 Actually, one of my favorite retellings of Frankenstein in terms of a visual medium is a Hammer horror version
Yes.
with Christopher Lee as the monster
Yes.
and Peter Cushing
Uh-huh.
as Victor.
Wow. You're going back into the annals of British history there.
Yeah,
Yeah. Wonderful.
Hammer horror is
Wonderful.
great.
And in your 20s, what were your books that had an effect on you there, or the writers?
Oh man. I'm trying to, like, I didn't read much for
No.
fun in college because you
Right.
really don't get the chance to read much for fun.
No.
Um, but I do remember, I think it was called Madame Bovary. We had to read
Yeah.
that, and I hated it. I hated
Yeah.
it so much. And it was so funny because we were in this class, and our teacher was like, "Oh, don't you feel sad for this character? Like, she has such a boring
Yeah.
husband." And I just was in class, and I'm like, her husband's boring because he had a super controlling mom and didn't get the chance to have a personality. Like,
Yeah.
this is a tragic tale about a person who didn't have the chance to have a personality and then gets stuck with this lady who's like, "You don't have a personality. I don't want to be with you." Like,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
go be with
That's an
someone else.
interesting take. That's probably one that you wouldn't get from other critiques.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And I take it you're not way past your 30s, right?
No, I'm actually turning 30 this month.
Right. So we've got one more decade to cover.
Mhm.
So 21 to 30,
Mhm.
one or two stories in there with lessons.
Oh man. So around that time is when I moved to Colorado. So now I got to think of so many things happened in Colorado. Um, the one I can think of right now is I was how did this even start? So we'll start with this.
Yeah.
I met a colleague of mine named Sam Long. He is an activist and educator here in the United States who's known for his gender inclusive biology curriculum. And how I met him was we worked at the same charter school, and we were both out as trans
Yes.
educators. And I ended up leaving due to some discrimination from the administrator. But later, he ended up talking to me and was like, "Hey, I really want to I really want to work on policy here in Colorado that supports trans educators staying in the profession because I've noticed here that a lot of my friends aren't staying as teachers."
Right.
And so I was like, "Awesome, I would love to help." Or he asked me if I wanted to help, and I said yes, that kind of thing. And so then we ended up making a 5-minute, 7-minute documentary about like 5 things you need in order to support trans educators.
Yeah.
And we did some other activism kind of things. And so the lesson I learned there is that, because I know at that point I was like kind of missing like what I talked about previously of what I had with in middle school with like I know what's going on. I'm in the know,
Yeah.
and like I can help, right? Like I'm
Right.
actively working with people to help something. And so that lesson there was kind of like I don't need to like be a part of some student government organization or something like that in order to start something like
Right.
that. And also that I don't necessarily need to be the lead. Like I was very comfortable with being the person that it's like, if you tell me about it and I can show up, I will definitely show up.
Right.
I will give my expertise. And then like and I will support when I can, but if I can't, then I can't. And
Right.
like, that's okay too. Like that's an okay way to engage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was that was early 20s, was it? Fray?
That was actually around like, it was like after 25.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
So just the period between 20 and 25.
hmm
What made you move to Colorado?
So I had a bit of a nervous breakdown.
Right, right. Yeah,
um, just a teeny bit. No, okay. No, it was a big thing.
yeah,
So I ended up having to leave school. I had been dating a guy for like, I had known him since I was 13, and we thought we were going to get married. And then
yeah,
at 21, we broke up. Well, when I was 21, we broke up.
yeah,
And shortly after that, I came out as trans.
yeah.
Um, and also, kind of around that same time, there was a lot of other mental health stuff going on. So I ended up basically being like, I need to take a break from school.
Right.
And during that time, I spent a year volunteering at a domestic violence shelter
Yeah,
local to the Lawrence, Kansas. And that's actually when I really realized that I liked teaching,
yeah,
because I did a lot of my, like, that's where I started developing presentations about the LGBTQ community. That's where I started designing interactive fun curriculum for students at the shelter to
yeah.
teach like um, safety regulations for like if there's a tornado in the house,
Right.
or like teaching them math if
Interesting,
they needed
interesting.
that.
Yeah,
Uh-huh. And so I did that for a year instead of being in school, so that I could have like I could full-time commit to
yeah.
going to therapy, recovering, and all that good stuff I needed to do. And then right after that, I moved to Colorado, because during that time I realized like I would not have felt comfortable transitioning if I went back to my old university.
Right.
So I just wanted a blank slate. Um, and Colorado was a pretty, like, at that time, like, they had a Planned Parenthood that could
Yeah.
provide healthcare and all this other stuff that Kansas didn't really have. So I was just like, I'll just move.
So I was going to say early 20s, just moving.
Yeah.
Um, any the problems of doing that? Can you?
What do you mean?
Were there any problems doing it? Did you face any trials? Any?
Yeah. Um, so I mean, in terms of actually doing it was pretty cut and dry.
Yeah.
I was able to ask a friend of mine to help me make sure that everything was moved in. I was very fortunate that at the time I didn't have to work because of like my income
Yeah.
was secure and fine. Um, and so I was able to like afford to get a place in Colorado for that time, and then
Yeah.
move everything and take my time and not have to worry about it as much. Um, the hardest part probably was the isolation,
Right.
because the reason why I went to Colorado was because at the time I didn't know anyone there,
Yeah.
which
Ah.
was a good thing,
Yeah.
because like I would be able to like introduce myself and not have to worry about a bunch of baggage and things like
Yes.
that. But it was
Yeah.
also a bad thing because it was super isolating. And at that point, especially since um, like after my big nervous breakdown, I wasn't as likely to feel comfortable in crowds anymore.
Right.
Um, like I didn't feel as confident in myself that I could just be in a crowd and exist and have that
Yeah.
be fine. Like it was very much like, oh my gosh, everything's everywhere. And so like there was a lot of isolation that I had to
Right.
deal with before I started university. And then I really,
Ah.
um, honestly, at first I was just like, I'm going to just go for classes and then I'm going to leave. But then it ended up very much like most of my schooling things, where it's like, okay, I'm going to do this activism thing. I'm
Yes.
going to teach this mini course. I'm going to do XYZ.
Yeah.
I ended up getting more involved. But before all that happened, I was very isolated.
And I'm interested. You talk a lot about mathematics and calculus and so forth.
hmm
Um, I have no idea whether that transcends into the, let's say, the world of space flight and things like that. But has anything like that ever taken your fancy being involved in?
Actually, when I was little, I really wanted to be an aerospace engineer.
Right.
Super bad. Because in Kansas, especially where I grew up, there was a field behind my house
Yes.
that nothing was built on, and there was like no light pollution. So it was really great and
Ah,
super easy to see the stars.
yeah.
Um, like many people from the Midwest, it's a pretty common thing. Like, I want to do something with space because it's so easy to see the sky here.
Absolute.
Like, you can
Absolute.
just see the Milky Way,
Yeah.
depending on where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. And I talk as someone who grew up enjoying writing,
Yeah.
but being absolutely crap at maths. I say that I wasn't. I was able to get by with maths,
Right.
but as soon as anybody mentioned it, this red mist came down. And yet my brother was almost a genius at maths, but his writing was very poor.
Okay.
So, I grew up thinking that if you were good at maths, you were no good at writing. And if you were good at writing, you were no good at maths. And I think that has carried on through with me,
Hmm.
because in terms of the computer, I now talk to people about putting stuff on the computer, and they say, well, it's easy. It's not to me.
Right.
I try and do it, and I get to a stage where what they told me to do, the outcome isn't what they told me it would be. And this red mist comes down. And so,
Yeah.
so it's interesting to find someone who had a foot in both camps.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting that you mentioned the red mist. And when we were talking about language acquisition when I was in my education program,
Yeah,
we called that an effective filter that
yeah,
comes up for students when we were specifically talking about language learners, but this happens with all students, where it's
yeah,
like when they feel very stressed, when they don't feel as confident in what they're doing, um, that filter comes up
yeah.
and they're not going to be able to learn anything. They're completely closed off. And that happens with adults
It's what
too.
your first thought is, oh, I can't do this.
Hmm.
And you've hardly even looked at it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's interesting. Fray, we're coming to the end. Is there
Okay.
anything else that you want to talk about? The time is yours.
um, I'm not. I'm trying to think.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I'm old. When I was growing up, gay and trans people were not even on the horizon.
Right.
You put they, them. Does
Hmm.
that mean you don't like to be described as you or me or I? I'm a little bit confused about why people put they, them at the end of that. Can you explain it?
Yeah. So, singular they is a pronoun that folks can use, similar to she or he in English. Um, Jane Austen used it.
Yeah,
Shakespeare used it. Honestly, like one of the big examples that I used to do, because my mom's had similar questions, and whenever like we would get takeout pizza, right? Uh, she'd be like, the pizza person's at the door, or the pizza man's at the door. They forgot their keys, or something,
right,
right? It's like we don't actually know, even though we call it a pizza man, we don't actually know they're a man.
right.
It could be whatever. It's probably not going to be like a hippopotamus, but they're going to be some kind of a person. And so they would just like they forgot their keys. And so it's very similar to that, where I just use. But I also this is mostly for personal, or when I'm explaining, I have the energy to explain
Yeah,
my pronouns. Because with especially the students that I work with, um, there's like a lot of like students with disabilities. I shouldn't say all of them. Some
no,
students, they get it, they already they're
yeah,
with it, they're fine, whatever.
yeah,
Just like with anybody. And then just like with other students, like sometimes they don't.
right,
And sometimes I have the energy to have that conversation, and
yeah,
sometimes I don't. So sometimes I just use he, him,
yes,
because I'm
yeah,
just like,
yeah.
I could have that conversation with you today,
But
but I don't want to.
a final question, Fray.
Yeah.
the next 5 years? What do you see? Where will Fray be in 5 years' time?
Yeah, so what I am hoping for, I was actually having this conversation with my sister yesterday, is that I want to um, be in a doctoral program so that I can do education research,
Yeah.
and then also still be doing um, like creating curriculum, creating personalized learning experiences. Though I honestly, especially after talking with my mom last week, would really love to do more with creating learning experiences specifically around like math and anthropology,
Right.
because I think that's really interesting, and that's what always got to me about math, and that's one of the reasons why I love it, is because it's a very human thing to do math, and it's used in very human ways, and I think that's something that people often forget when we're in classrooms and people are just being like, look at this formula, we use this formula, we plug it in, blah blah blah. It's a very human thing to do, and there are very human stories behind
I
math.
was going to say, when you bring anthropology into it, the first thought that came into my head was that humans were using math centuries ago.
Mhm.
It was part of what humans were at that time.
Yeah.
And we forget that, I think. And we often forget that the formulas we use now were generated centuries ago.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Yeah. And so when you get to that point in 5 years' time, will you still be teaching, or will,
Um. Sorry,
I was
I
going
didn't
to
mean
say,
to.
will you be taking it further into academia and
Um.
give up the teaching?
I would still like to do some teaching, because I love students and I love making new learning experiences.
Great.
Um, if I've learned anything through this past year, it's that I'm not sure that I want to do my own marketing and stuff anymore.
Right.
So I'm not sure if I want to be my own business owner, but I would really love to still work with students and still.
Yeah.
And the good thing about being a tutor is that it takes time to really establish
Yes.
like the word of mouth and the connections with people. But once you have that established,
Yeah.
you get a steady stream of folks,
Yes.
and you can still have those connections. So I would still really love to do that and work with folks, and make those personalized, unique experiences. But I might not be doing it full time, and I wouldn't necessarily be focusing on doing it as a business.
Well, if there's anything, coming to the end, anything I can do to help, the first question, Fray, is how can people get hold of you?
Yeah, so I have a website, fraypatton.wordpress.com. I also have, actually, are people would they be able to see the Zoom?
Yes. Oh, yes. This will go on YouTube, and
Perfect. So then I can just put a virtual background that can actually show all the stuff that I'm talking about.
wonderful. There you go.
Yes, I just got to make sure I can actually. There we go.
Yep.
Kind of happening.
Wonderful. I
There we
might
go.
ask the rest of my people to do that.
Yeah,
That
so
is
it's just a lot
tremendous,
easier.
Fray.
Yeah. Um, and
So,
I don't have this on here, but there's also IMB mentors. I'm working with them right now.
but thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.